So now, after this session from the NGO and business perspective, we are going smoothly to the cities, to the sustainable cities. And I personally believe that for circular economy, also cities are crucial. And this is also the place where the change will start and could expand. So now we have a great speakers. We start with the presentation of Professor Gerhard Schmitt of ETH Zurich. He will give us short presentation how to make cities more sustainable. It tells us about research by the Future Cities Laboratory at ETH Zurich. And then we have panel discussion which will be moderated by our colleague from INNOWO, Joanna Wis-Bielewicz. And again, Professor Gerhard Schmitt will be one of the panelists, and join him great experts regarding city issues. It will be Oriana Romano, Head of Unit Water Governance and Circular Economy at OECD. Ashleigh McLennan, Sustainable Economy and Procurement Officer at ICLEI. Tamara, Streefland Circular Cities Program, Metabolic Foundation, Metabolic Institute. INNOWO, together with Metabolic, already running a big project about resources flow analysis in 3 Polish cities, Krakow, Gdańsk and Lublin. So this is a big project. We try to really research and see how we can make the cities more circular, and for sure Tamara will also mention that and tell you a little bit about. So enjoy the next session about sustainable cities.
Thank you very much for the introduction. This is Gerhard Schmitt. I hope you can hear me. I greet you from Singapore and at the same time from Zurich and Switzerland. Can we move to the first slide, please? How to make cities more sustainable. You can see the logo of the Cooling Singapore, which is an important part of making cities more sustainable in the tropics. And at the bottom, excuse me, you can see the many organizations and universities that help us on this effort and this research enterprise. Next slide, please. Every city has its own DNA. This is the first thing we learn, being outside of Europe, being outside of these temperate climates, being in the real tropics, where most of the population of the world is already living and will be living even more in the next 100 years. And also most of the construction is going on in these countries around the equator, north and south of the equator. It's a huge effort by all the cities to house these more than 2 billion people that will live more in cities in 20 years than today. So we see Singapore at the top, this very significant building, the so-called Marina Bay Sands, a building on top of a building, and we see Zurich, a typical Middle European city, at the bottom. Next, please. We know that climate change and global warming has big impact, not only in the tropics, but also in Europe. And you see an example here from Switzerland from last year, many heat records, drying grass, and very severe impact on the environment and on the recreational possibilities of the population. Next. Next, please. And here we see Singapore, a city which is trying to become the most lovable, not only the most livable city, but also the most lovable city. And here are the things that they are trying to do. High outdoor thermal comfort, clean air, clean industry. And this is actually an example of a design that one of our colleagues in Singapore, from the Singapore ETH Center, Professor Kees Christianse and his company, have made for a huge part a new city within Singapore, which is a city-state in itself. And you can see this interplay of vegetation, of water, of high-rises, of high-density structures, at the same time providing thermal comfort and outdoor working and living possibilities. Next. The second set is the other criteria we're trying to fulfill for Singapore and other tropical cities as most lovable cities. It's less noise, it's renewable energy, and it's circular economy. So the topic of this whole Congress, which I find is really fantastic, is also part of our work in Singapore, and we try everything to achieve this goal, but on a whole city-state and regional state, and not only on an architectural state or even a personal state. It's all interconnected. Next, please. You know from many publications that cities, they make only 3% of the Earth's surface, but they consume more than 70% of the Earth's energy, and they emit more than 60% of the greenhouse gases. So is this a real big topic to tackle? And here you see in the background a map of Asia, of course, of India, of China, also Singapore as this little dot in the center at the bottom. And you can see how much the light emission is a significant indicator for the energy consumption. North Korea, for example, you see very less light than, for example, South Korea. Next slide, please. We see also the development from 1900 to today, and you can see these different colors of blue first, and then of red and dark red and really hot, as you can see over the years. In the old days in Singapore and other tropical cities, people tried to be responsive to the climate and to adapt to the climate, which was already warm but not as hot as today, with these kinds of constructions. 1, 2, 3-story maybe, lots of ventilation, shaded by trees and so on. So it was very effective at this time, but not everybody could afford it. And today, next slide, we see the reality that is happening. You see a big, you can go to the next slide here, new developments. Stop at this slide, thank you. And you can see these high-rises, which are 20, 30, 40 stories high, and which have to be air-conditioned because it's getting so hot. And on the left part of the slide, you see this tower with tons of air conditionings on top of each other, aligned for each apartment on each floor. And that creates something which we call the stacking effect, so that one exhaust of hot air from one apartment goes up to the next one and makes it less and less efficient to cool all these apartments. So these high-rises, they emit like fumes or flames of hot air going into the sky, which then of course also heats up the entire environment of the city. That's a observation on the urban, on the architectural scale, which is very important for all tropical cities. Maybe not so much for European cities because they're not such density and such height of buildings yet, but in general it will be also a problem in Europe in highly densely built up cities. Next slide. Here we see what is the reason for the so-called urban heat island effect, which is hitting every city in the world by now. So we have on the left side, you have the rural area, temperatures relatively constant over time, day and night goes up and down slightly, but then you come to the suburbs and there you already have certain peaks. The temperature is in general warmer because of all the built up streets, the buildings, less trees and less water maybe. And then you go to the urban centers, the central business districts, how they are called, and there we see those peaks. And we see this delta T, the temperature difference from outside of the city to inside of the city, and this can be quite high. In Singapore, actually, it's up to 7 degrees in the hottest areas versus the area around Singapore, which are not built up. Next. This is not a problem of Singapore alone. As I said, here you can see a summary of all cities in the world for which we have data. This is one of our colleagues' papers from Nature recently. And you can see all these dots. When they are yellow and red, that means the temperature in the cities is hotter than the surrounding country. And as I mentioned, it can be up to 5, 6, 7 degrees hotter. In Europe, in Northern Europe, sometimes it's seen as more comfortable in winter, but in the summer, as you will experience, even in Warsaw, definitely in Vienna, definitely in Zurich, in Paris, we know that hundreds, maybe sometimes even thousands of people die over a summer with these heat waves that are hitting Europe and other places in the world. And here you can see worldwide, this is a huge problem. What can we do about it? How we can make it more sustainable? Because a city which is overheating is like an organism which has a fever, this is not sustainable. We have to bring down that fever. We have to bring the input and output of energy in these cities into balance. Next. The consequences can be fairly severe. We have daily temperatures going up, increase of 1.4 to 4.6 degrees in this century if you don't do anything. And if you look at the next one, it's not only the temperature, but it's also the rain and the downpours. Next slide. We have increasing sudden downpours that cause flooding, even in places like Singapore, and are very uncomfortable and diminish the outdoor comfort, and people cannot be outdoors anymore, which is very important for their health. Next, please. So we started this project called Cooling Singapore, an integrated and holistic approach to address the urban heat challenge for Singapore and other cities around the world. It's really for many, many cities because the principles are always the same. Next. We have the typical built-up area in Singapore. This is our research laboratory. You can see this combination of streets, of buildings, of trees, but it's a very densely populated part. And here we can see really the bottom of the problem or the bottom of the solution. This is the so-called the Sankey diagram of Singapore, and you can have this Sankey diagram for every city, for Vienna, for Warsaw, for all of the cities who we're meeting with today. On the left side, you have the energy supply that's coming in. The green one, for example, this is natural gas, and the pink one at the bottom, this is oil and heavy oil. And on the right side, you can see the demand side. That means where the energy is used for. So industry you see floating at the second from the top, which is very big. But even the power sector is consuming a lot of energy and also producing a lot of heat. And then the buildings, that's the one in the middle, and transport, the second from the bottom, and the very small one at the bottom is the people themselves. So you can see industry, buildings, and transport, and the power generation are the big consumers and producers of heat and energy in Singapore and in many other tropical cities. Every city, of course, has a different Sankey diagram, a different profile, but in cities like Singapore and those cities in the world that rely heavily on coal, on oil and gas for their electricity production, it is very, very significant to decarbonize these cities. And along with the decarbonization comes actually the cooling of these cities, or the reduction of the overheating and the heat island effect of the cities. Next, please. There are many ways to do that. Here we have a look at the whole island of Singapore now. On the left, this is just a map with looks very green. Singapore has more than 40% of the whole surface is green. On the right side, we see the heat map of Singapore. We zoom in a bit more. Go to the next slide, please. There we see the part of Singapore. In the bottom center, you see the central business district, which we look at later. On the right side, you see the huge airport, which is all created on artificial land, reclaimed land. Next slide, please. And keep that form in mind. And here we can see the shape of Singapore and the heat island, where it is hotter than it should be in the central business district. And in the top of the island, or in the center of the island, you see where it's still natural vegetation, water reservoirs, very beautiful areas, and there it is relatively cool. Next. This is how it looks in reality. You can see this intermixture of trees and buildings. And next. And you can see that the buildings in the next slide are made mostly of bright color, which is very important because this way they can reflect most of the sun's radiation and do not soak it up. If they would be black, it would be even hotter in the city, which has an average temperature of more than 27 degrees per year. Next slide, please. Here you can see what transportation is doing to add heating. This is like a floor heating system for the entire city, and you can see the red spots and the hot spots, which really puts additional heat from combustion engines into the urban system. This happens in every system, in every city which is driving with normal cars, combustion engines. Therefore, of course, one of our first recommendations for this island of Singapore is to replace all combustion engines with electric or fuel cell engines, so to bring down this heat emitted from that. Next one, please. Here we can see many mitigation proposals that we have, and the next one, you can click through these slides. You can see all the different actions we can take on the materials, on the configuration, on the geometry of the buildings, on the vegetation, on the water bodies in the cities, also on the materials in the cities, and on the different shading devices on the outside and the inside, on the materials and the surfaces on the city, on the transportation systems, and finally on the energy systems. We develop these tools or develop these advices for every single city. This is for Singapore and for the tropical cities only, but it can be done for other cities as well. Next slide, please. Here we see, if you look at the watch at the top left, you can see the time of the day. So this is early in the morning, and you can see the heat island effect developing in Singapore. Now it's get a bit later, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you see all these cars driving through the cities, driving to work and emitting more heat into the urban system. Then around 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, a breeze is coming from the south, from the sea, and it brings the temperature down to a cool 26, 27 degrees. But early afternoon already, the cars are coming back and driving home, and you can see it gets much hotter again and again. And in the afternoon, you can see these heat island effects developing, and it gets warmer in the evening. And even at midnight, it's very, very hot. And this is when it's really dangerous, uncomfortable, because people cannot sleep, and they don't get the rest that they would need for the day. So this is very drastic show of the heat island effect. This heat island effect is happening in every city, and the more we can produce renewable energy to make electricity to be used in the city for air conditioning, for driving and so on, the more we reduce the heat island effect and the more comfortable we make the life in the city. Next, please. You have to advance again. Yes, this is important because every city has vulnerability areas, vulnerable areas where people are living. We have put together more than 60 criteria for vulnerability, and it's highly linked, of course, to the heat and also to the income of the people, to their age, to their personal interests and so on. And see, every city has its districts where it's dangerous sometimes to live or to be in areas of heat waves or in times of summer or winter. And every city can have and must have such a vulnerability map so we can protect the people living in the city. Next, please. And we built for that, and this is the new development, a so-called digital urban climate twin for the city, a complete digital twin of everything that can be represented in a model or with digital means in a city. And then we can run different scenarios to improve the city before we actually take actions and build these things. Then it's too late to correct it. So we first have to simulate it holistically and then do it. The next slides we can go through very quickly because they just show details of this digital urban climate twin. It's heavily relying on technology, of course, on data from the city. It's heavily relying on the interaction of different models. Here you see this climate twin. And finally, it gives the city, hopefully, here, this one, we can stay here for a second, the way to reduce the temperature. And you can see if the city government says we want to bring down the temperature, let's say from 34 degrees to 30 degrees, like in Singapore, you have to do all these actions, the materials, the energy, the vegetation, the shading, the transport, urban geometry, water features. You have to change all of those. At the same time, you get benefits in the environment, in the economy, in the health, and in the costs of managing and running the city. Next slide. You can only do that with the people, and this is so important. Vienna, for example, many European cities do this already. They invite citizens to help them design, co-design the city and to define how the city should be in the future. We call this citizen design science. Next one, please. And we can see in different places how that is used. In Singapore, for example, for the redesign of a huge container terminal that you see here in the center in a new type of city, replacing industry, moving industry to another part, and giving access to the population to this beautiful area in Singapore. Next. And we give people the opportunity to design and redesign the cities themselves here with tools that we develop for massive open online courses. And you can see that the population in Singapore and in other places is very careful on how to plan and design their city. Next, please. This is not only a problem for Singapore, as I mentioned, but for every city in Europe. And we can see a close relation between the heating up of the cities, the heat waves, the production of renewable energy in the city, and making cities in general more healthy, more sustainable, and which is important for the long term, more resilient. And with this, I want to stop and thank you very much for your attention. Next one, and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Schmitt, for your great introduction and in-depth introduction to our meeting and our discussion today. My name is Joanna Wis-Bielewicz. I am a member of the board at the Foundation INNOWO, the host of today's meeting. I'm really happy that we have this opportunity to meet in these strange times, at least online, and discuss a very important topic that is sustainable urban development, the circular development. Welcome everyone that is now joining us today, and of course welcome panelists. It is a great honor for me to moderate this discussion that we will have today, the titled Circular Cities in a Smart Way. Welcome to Tamara Streefland, Circular Cities Program Lead from Metabolic. We've met before, and I'm very happy to see you here, Tamara. Dr. Oriana Romano, Head of Unit, Water Governance and Circular Economy in Cities at OECD. I'm very happy that we've managed to connect, and welcome to the meeting today.
Thank you.
Ashleigh McLennan, Sustainable Economy and Procurement Officer at ICLEI. Hello, nice meeting you.
Hello. Hi.
And welcome Professor Gerhard Schmitt, representing the Technical University from Zurich and the ETH Center in Singapore with this great case study that we've just heard.
Thank you. Hi.
Since we've already seen some great material, we know that there is a knowledge and there are models that are available for the cities. And I would like to lead our discussion today that we would build the narrative or deliver the narrative for local governments. Why should they go circular? And how could they do this? And I'm really hoping that we will inspire more local governments globally to do so. Having said that, I would like to ask Tamara, why do we need circular urban design from your perspective and the perspective of Metabolic?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? Like the internet glitched and I just missed the question. The rest of it I heard.
It's a very simple question, like, and a very short one, at the same time, very depth, I think. So why do we need circular urban design?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So that all goes back to, and I think I already talked about that quite a bit, is cities are huge levels. On one side, they're these global economic centers with longevity, but then on the other side, they're also huge resources, right? They use a lot of resources. And right now, we are fueling our city urban development, extractive economy. So we're using all virgin materials and monoculture food systems and global supply chain, get everything we need populations to thrive. And also sometimes like resources aren't distributed, right? And cities are growing. So we're going to have more materials, energy, and keep up with that growth and keep our cities developing. In doing so, in this model, we are crossing the planetaries, right? So we are starting to get more with climate change, both inside and outside of cities, phonetics, air pollution, and this is affecting both like populations that are already marginalized. So we need to think about a different system, right? Like how can we work a global sustainable, but also what role can cities play? And that's a role that circularity can play. So we do to get to these cities of the future, both distribute resources equally and fairly. Also, we stay within the planetary boundaries, right? We don't, and I think like we're already underway. There's lots of initiative, and I think the clarity to go to a sustainable system is really active and metabolically. So not only looking at materials and energy and water, but also taking human health and culture and other types of value into account, so that we make sure that by having one positive impact, for example, on our energy use, we don't have a negative impact somewhere else, so we don't shift burdens. So the circular economy is to achieve sustainability, and that starts with reducing resources, right? Like, can we use less energy in our cities? Can we also, we don't waste any valuable resources, so there'll be something still. An opportunity there in circular urban design is, of course, to urban mining, to use materials that were out of demolition of older buildings and reusing those for making construction, right? Local material. And then also, of course, like, how can you have initiatives on the ground? So thinking about how different neighborhoods can play different roles in achieving citywide goals. And I think most of all, what is important, and that is in the circular urban building and what that would look like, is integrated green. Gerhard talked about the urban heat or flood and microclimates. Like, one of the most important opportunities that we have what circles look like, and think about how we can integrate green space and have biodiversity in cities, and make sure that cities don't extend the footprint that they actually have with the resources and we use within city boundaries. So I guess the circular economy holds for cities is that it's a very concise framework into achievability goals, so making sure that planets are not destroying the rest of our cities and the rest of the planet.
Thank you, Tamara. It's very interesting to see how this local narrative, the narrative about local communities, about life in cities, is moving towards a global perspective of the planetary boundaries, of the resources that are diminished, and as you've mentioned, cities are growing, and we know that they cannot grow the way or based on the patterns that we know if we are to hold the peace on the earth and the global population health and all those values and important for the quality of life and general life on the planet aspects. And that is why I would like to invite to our discussion Dr. Oriana Romano, the head of unit of water governments and the circular economy in cities at the OECD. And it is very interesting for me to see that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the well-known organization with over 60 years of experience, but rather usually connected with this international debates. Now it's also within the debate on the urban circular development. Ms. Romano, why does the OECD join this global discussion? Why the OECD, you and the OECD got involved in the debate about the circular cities?
Well, thank you very much, Joanna, and I'm very happy to be here and to contribute to this debate. Thanks for the question. It doesn't come as a surprise, actually. The OECD has been always at the forefront of many policies, and the role of the OECD is to support governments with policy making and implementation. The circular economy is not something new for the OECD. We have been working on this subject for quite a while. Now, the interest on cities is true that is something incipient for many local and regional governments. And so, as the role of the OECD is to support with the novelty of this approach, we have been involved in what we call policy dialogues with specific cities, like, for example, Valladolid in Spain, Granada in Spain, Umea in Sweden, Groningen in the Netherlands, Glasgow in the United Kingdom, as well as national governments like Ireland, in order to identify together with the local governments and a wide range of stakeholders what are the challenges, but also what are the opportunities for the circular economy transition. As Tamara was saying, we live in a linear world, and so it is not straightforward also for government to identify what could be their role in supporting this transition. So the reason why cities are now interested in the circular economy, it is basically for three reasons that we identified in our forthcoming report on the circular economy in cities and regions. The OECD will be launching this report at the end of this month, on the 28th of October. We launched a survey across more than 50 cities and regions in the OECD area. And what we found out is that, of course, there is an important environmental narrative behind the circular economy. The circular economy is seen as one of the means for contributing to achieve carbon neutral objectives. In fact, the circular economy is very much related to efficient and sustainable material management, when material management is one of the main causes of greenhouse gases emission. So if we look at sectors, like, for example, building and construction. There are projections, like in the case of the city of Amsterdam, that applying circular economy principles could reduce by 500,000 tons per year of CO2 the negative externalities on the environment. But beyond the environmental narrative, there is a strong economic and social narrative. The circular economy is also projected and actually is expected to create jobs, like, for example, in the repairing, remanufacturing, recycling sectors. And these activities are very much labor intensive compared to the traditional mining and manufacturing economy. So there are projections in Europe that the circular economy by 2030 could stimulate around 700,000 new jobs. So this is an opportunity. And also there is another important reason for why cities are involved in this discourse on the circular economy is that the circular economy can boost innovation and create new business models, how to create a mobility that is for people and not for cars, how to reuse or repurpose empty buildings, how to create urban agriculture and reduce the transport cost between urban and rural areas. So there are many opportunities that cities are looking at within the circular economy approach, and the OECD as an intergovernmental organization is supporting this transition, and so we work hand in hand with several local governments.
Thank you very much, Oriana, for this amazing introduction and also for linking the topic of circular economy and this global perspective. And I think what I take from what you said, it's a long list of opportunities that we really have to remember, and not only thinking about the burden that the transition would embody, let's say, but to think about the potential. So you said social economic impact benefits, 70,000 new jobs in Europe. We're talking health linked to, for example, the new models of mobility. You've also mentioned innovations. It's a beautiful story, and I would like to now reach to Ashleigh McLennan from ICLEI and actually find out whether cities already know about it. Ashleigh, you represent ICLEI, a global network of over 1,700 cities, local governments. And do you think that those local governments are aware of first of all, the opportunities that are there in the circular economy, but also the responsibility that they hold for this global transition, and that is inevitably linked to our urban life?
Yes, well, I mean, are local governments at large aware of their role in the circular economy and the opportunities that are in there? I would have to say no, not yet, at least not in the same way as they are with regards to their role and responsibilities in sustainability, for instance. But of course, circularity is a newer concept, and although spread fast, it's definitely not reached everybody yet. What we do have, however, is a lot of really great local level initiatives which are being driven by cities, or maybe more specifically, have been driven by individuals or specific teams or departments within city administrations who understand circularity, who really understand all the opportunities of it, and who are proactively trying to make it within their own sphere of influence. So this has, of course, been really important for getting us to this point where there's wider interest in circular economy and we have real examples of what it looks like in practice. For instance, we work with lots of European cities in projects looking at specific aspects of circular economy. A lot of the things that we've heard about from the other panelists and from earlier sessions, we talk about piloting public procurement of circular goods and services. We have projects looking at different waste streams, whether it's plastic waste, construction or organic waste. There's lots of projects in cities that are really active in building renovation or construction or energy systems and transport and mobility. So there's a lot of activity happening in Europe on sustainability and circular economy. But what we need is cities that are going to really lead a system-wide change across their city. Because of course, circular economy is a systemic change. It's not things happening in isolation. So what we need is cities that can use all of the levers available to them, from procurement through to economic development services, transport, urban design, city planning, everything that you can think of that local government is responsible for. And they need to align all of these different activities in the direction of circularity. So we really need city leadership to embrace circular economy and embed it in their operational policy. Not many cities have done this yet, but we are at the turning point, I think. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we launched the European Circular Cities Declaration. This is a real step forward in cities embracing their role in the circular economy, because in signing this declaration, they're committing to using all of the levers available to them. There's already 28 European cities who've signed this declaration, including capital cities like Helsinki, Budapest, Prague, Oslo, Copenhagen, Ljubljana. Also a lot of leaders in sustainability like Maribor, Freiburg, Malmo. And the Circular Cities Declaration is also being supported by a lot of prominent organisations. ICLEI is behind it, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, European Investment Bank, Eurocities, UN Environment Programme, and a lot of great national and regional level partners. So to get back to your question, while I don't think local governments across the board are aware yet of their role and responsibility, I think we are at a very exciting moment. And considering how quickly the circular economy agenda is developing and how many key cities and actors are aligning behind a circular agenda for cities, I think if you were to ask me the same question in a few years' time, I would be able to give a much more positive answer to that.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting and exciting moment, that's true, to be part of this global movement, I think, and with here. And I'm really interested to understand how the scientific institution can support this local government movement, because as we've heard at the beginning of our session today, there are already knowledge, there is already knowledge, there are already models, and as you said also, Ashleigh, there is a systematic change needed. And here I would like to reach to Professor Schmitt, and from your experience, Professor, is it easy for the scientific institution to cooperate with the local governments? Do local authorities look for such support in the scientific institutions? And finally, from your experience, how does the scientific institution can really support local government in this systematic change that we hear is important, or systemic?
Thank you. These are great questions. And also, I was impressed by the answers to the question you posed before by Tamara and Ashleigh. So this is really, and Oriana, of course, it is really a concerted effort that we have to do here. And research and universities have been doing work on this for a long time, but maybe they have not found the right word to it. It's more than 30 years ago that the stocks and flows of materials, of water and so on, and the city was researched in academia, but it stayed more on the academic level. Although the circular economy and circular ecology of a city was already talked about then. But as in science, it always happens, it takes about 20 to 30 years really to prove themselves that these results are trustable, and then they move into the mainstream and then also become available and used by the cities in this case. The question that you ask is extremely difficult because it can be answered with a no and with a yes. It is very good that the cities, the local governments are interested in this now. So to work with them is getting easier. But I must say, from 10 years of experience, or 30 years actually of experience in Zurich, in Switzerland, and now more than 10 years in Singapore, it is at the same time not easy because these cities are really working quite well. And why should they change? Why should they do something that science comes up with and has ideas and tells them about circular, you shouldn't burn your things, although it makes energy, you shouldn't do this, but you should do that. Why? The cities are organized, all cities are organized into different departments. These departments are different in every city. The departments have their own governance, their own interaction, not interaction with other departments, and it's a careful balance. Every city has to strive in their own governance. So if somebody comes from the outside, from science, and gives you this advice or suggestions, for them it's really hard. I can really understand that, and because their role is also a lot in policy making that we talked about just before. And policy making for the city, policy making for the country or the region even. You meet the right people in the city government and then it works. And I think this is the only thing that's common to all places in the world. The city governments and the local governments do look for support from science all over the world, but in different degrees. I can find again these two cities of Zurich and of Singapore to be extremely interested in results from science. So there's a real dialogue developing between those. And I think that's why we also are very happy to work with these two cities. But by now, our lab in Singapore works with more than 20 cities around the equator. And we know every government, every governance is different. And it has to be a step-by-step process to engage the city governments with that. We find over the last 10 years, 15 years in Asia and Singapore, and also in Europe, one of the most effective ways to interact with the city governments to make them interested is not through directly addressing them, but maybe through students. Students who are in education, who are in the city, who try to find out new things in the city, and naturally, they do measurements, they do drawings, they take photographs. The population is interested with them. What are you doing? They talk to them. And within a few days, normally, these students can connect or identify the decision makers, the opinion leaders in the cities. And from there, we get a very fast interaction with the main decision makers in the cities. And they are different, again, in every city. And they are definitely interested in science, yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Schmitt. I was just informed that we have the second round coming, but it would be rather an elevator pitch for each of us. So I'm sorry for that, but I think we will have around 3 minutes each, which is really unfair for selling the story how to support the circular urban development and the cities in their circular transition. But I hope we will manage to do so. And that is why just short and fast questions for each of you. And thank you very much for this really broad explanation of why we should do this, all of us, all the involved stakeholders and all the ones that should get involved. So Ashleigh, if you were to give just one advice to the local governments, where should they start? If we're looking for low-hanging fruits, like what would this first advice or one key advice be?
Yes, okay. So if I could give cities just one suggestion, it would be to buy circular. Everything that a city buys has an impact on the environment as well as on businesses, workers, and citizens. And the public sector in general buys a huge amount of stuff. In Europe alone, it's estimated to spend about 2 trillion euros per year on goods and services. So just imagine what cities could achieve in terms of circular transition if they directly incentivize circular business models through their own spending. And from a city perspective, circular public procurement, as we call it, buying circular, this makes a lot of sense. Environmentally, of course, it saves resources, it saves carbon, and it reduces waste. But it also saves the city's money. And as Dr. Gerhard just said, it needs to make sense for the cities if they're really going to embrace this. But yeah, I mean, there's evidence to support this. I think there was a recent study by the Danish Environmental Protection Agency which calculated the total economic, social, and climate costs of circular procurement. And it found that in almost all areas, no matter what a city's buying, products and services with the lowest carbon impact are also the lowest cost options when you're thinking about the total lifetime cost to the buyer. So cities need to buy circular, especially things like circular buildings, big infrastructure projects, but also circular furniture, circular uniforms, workwear, whatever it is. They can also think about buying products as services. But no matter what they're doing, the most important thing is that their spending is part of a circular economy solution rather than reinforcing linear economy patterns and problems.
Thank you very much. It was really nice meeting you. And moving towards Dr. Oriana Romano. And I think we, all of us, agree that this is a very good approach to think about this practical aspects of the transformation and looking for other opportunities that could be used by the local governments. Dr. Romano, how could local governments turn those challenges of resource-efficient economy, climate crisis, the global pandemic also, to opportunities with the circular transition of urban environment? And does OECD recognize a systemic solution that they should turn towards?
Well, thank you very much for your question. Is indeed very timing in relation to the pandemic, to the crisis that we are living, that actually highlighted some unsustainable path in terms of production and consumption patterns. This pandemic will change the way we consume, we use resources, we travel, we work. And so it is indeed also an opportunity to rethink about business model and the way we carry out this activity. This is from an individual point of view, but also for many companies and of course for government. And so the recovery for governments will be a green recovery. There is so much attention on green and digital in the future of the agenda. So we do believe that the circular economy will be a means for cities to become greener and at the same time also smarter. Now, the circular economy is systemic by nature. When we talk about the circular economy, it's not just about waste. It's not just about the government taking action, and it's not just about a city as such, as administrative boundary of a cities in which many activities and initiatives in relation to the circular economy that the previous speakers mentioned are taking place. The systemic approach that we embraced in the forthcoming report on the circular economy in cities and regions looks at a framework that connects people, policies, and places, as the circular economy is a shared responsibility, so across a wide range of stakeholders, and it also highlight the need of connecting the dots across policies. Governments have been looking and working on strategic plans for towards tackling climate change, but also many agendas in relation to improve inclusiveness and access to services in cities. So the circular economy should be a means by which this systemic and economic model could improve and make sure that we use resources wisely while designing out waste and pollution. Cities and regions play an important role in this transition, and in the report we highlight many of their activities that can be put in place as promoters, facilitators and enablers of the circular economy, because we talked about the opportunities, but indeed many challenges are related to financial issues, regulatory obstacles, lack of data and information. So there is much work to do, but this increasing interest and enthusiasm from many local governments can really pave the way for the future of this transition.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romano. It's a highlight for me to remember that circular economy, circular transition is about people, about the policies and places. So that those systems, the models that we're looking for should embody all those aspects. And I know Tamara, Metabolic, is working rather holistically with the model of circular economy. And I saw it and I was really inspired how you discussed the modules and analyzed data and looked at for the systemic approach, but also remembered and brought to the discussion the disadvantaged communities, health, and people at each time and each step of your solutions. And Metabolic is a consultancy, is an institute, venture, foundation, and a software. You use system thinking to support companies and cities in their shift. And while or when approached by the local government, and I know you've worked with quite a few globally, how do you support those local governments? How you support cities? What do you really do, to support them?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because where do you start? Like, cities are such complex systems, and we basically have the systemic approach that we use in different contexts. Starts with where you are. I think Gerhard said it, and I think our most important things of context is very different to each other. So we start with understanding how to do it, right? Like, what are the main impacts? What are we dealing with? Water consumption, energy bills, and what are the main impacts that we see? Spatial analysis, where are these impacts happening? And looking at what stakeholders are active in a city, what initiatives are already happening. So really to understand and identify the most important activities to transition our system to a more sustainable system. So understanding where is a good basis to then understand where you'd like to go. Right, so that's the second step, setting a vision. We very much believe that, like, imagining the future and getting everybody on the same page in what the future would look like is around for motivating, but also getting everyone on the same page for action. And then finally, we, together with governments, local stakeholders such as institute, but also NGOs or community organizations, and of course also local businesses, activities within a roadmap, right? So map out what you need to do to achieve that vision. And then, of course, we don't want to make reports, right? There's so many, and this is actually maybe something to mention that's really exciting, and I think Agnieszka mentioned it, is that this process we are right now doing with 3 Polish cities, in Krakow and Gdańsk, and the phase that we're now in is coming up with these roadmaps and really working together with stakeholders to identify them, because of course we don't want to submit a report, we want to action and accelerate, right? If we look at the global climate change emergency. So we need to start implementing. There's a couple of important parts. So where do you start afterwards, right? So one thing is like creating into the value that we can have with business, right? So really seeing what are the effects on achieving our goals, different certain solutions. The second one is collaboration. So we're trying to work together with different cities globally to also the ICLEI and of course have also like really big networks to really exchange what works and work. And finally, I think government, like with municipal, big role to play, not only with procurement, like but also thinking about flexibility, because in intervention context there's so many rules or master plans or zoning regulations, and I think what would be helpful is to be very flexible and to also provide funding mechanisms for like government ones. There's also so many initiatives and community organizations that have great ideas and already have built such a like the great networks and the capital, the social capital to start implementing. And sometimes they just need the enabling context to achieve, to bring it forward. I don't know if that answers your question, but I can talk for hours about this.
Thank you, Tamara. I mean, at least, it showcases the ecosystem that it has to be somehow thought through and has to be brought to the picture. And we understand it's a broad topic, and we had only 1 hour today. And my final question is the question for Professor Schmitt, the final question for today, as a kind of summary. And from your perspective, Professor, of 30 years of sustainable development experience, 10 years in the circular economy analysis, and also what's important, I think, your experience from both Europe and Asia, which might be a little bit different space to discuss local government policies and implementations. So what's your final, for today, advice for local authorities aiming at smart, sustainable development? What should they do?
They should listen to Tamara because she has said almost everything. So this is very, very good. But to repeat the most important concepts, I think, is to think really holistically for them and to see the city as a complex system. Now, how to do that, this takes some work. You have to get to know your city. And for this, you have to study its metabolism, as was said before, the stocks and flows, what goes in and out. Most governments don't know that precisely. It has to be done. So this is homework for them. But also invite the scientists to give advice. And even more important, invite the citizens to give advice and help and input. Because only on the basis of working with the citizens, we can change those cities. We know that very well from Switzerland. It's a direct democracy. The citizens are the ones who drive the whole development, and this is how it should be. And for that, I think it's very important that every city will have a digital urban twin for all the things that we see in the city. This twin has to be used by the city government, but it has to be transparent to the population. Everybody has to have it on their app or on their phone. And finally, make this exchange between the citizens and the city and the scientists a permanent institution. It's so easy today to do that, and that should become part of every city's daily life, this exchange between citizens, science, and the city government.
Thank you very much.
That's my advice.
Thank you very much. I hope that there are many local governments listening to us today. There are already few that in Poland that are engaged in the sustainable economic development and circular economy, understanding how complex the topic is by working with Metabolic and INNOWO, which of course we are very happy, and it's an interesting and inspiring challenge for everyone. And gathering data tends to be a very important aspect together, of course, with inviting multiple stakeholders on board. So do you have a final remark? We have maybe 4 minutes, so 1 minute each for the final remark on this session today. And maybe I will invite you in the way as we did during the round 1. So I'll start from Tamara, and then Dr. Oriana Romano, Ashleigh, and Professor Schmitt. Tamara, 1 minute.
Yeah, so a final remark. Yeah, so I think what I just emphasize is that what I'm really interested in, and that's maybe also or something to maybe trigger, how can we really start exchanging knowledge, right? Like how can we connect different cities and understand what our practice is, and how can we also, there's a lot of data out there. Many organizations, like we're all reinventing the wheel because we're not connected enough. So I think my last remark would be like effectively across. This is a planetary issue. We should also address it as in a connected planetary manner. I think, connecting everyone.
Dr. Romano.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity. My last words probably are related to the results of many inputs that we hear from stakeholders, from our policy dialogues. There is basically a lack of understanding of what the circular economy is, what the costs and the benefits are, what are the opportunities. So the first thing that we can also help with is really to raise awareness and help governments, businesses, and citizens to embrace the circular economy, understanding the opportunities and the concept itself as not such as something that it's a bit theoretical, but something that can be put in practice and can really generate and improve environmental quality, can generate jobs, and can also support economic growth in cities and regions as well.
Thank you very much. Ashleigh, your final remark.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here today. It's been really great hearing the other panelists. And I think I also echo what they've been saying. Collaboration is so important. There's a lot of cities out there who have already started testing circular economy, whether it's the measurement, doing public procurement, doing just different pilots in all types of areas. So there's always someone who's going to have experience and is happy to share that experience. So let's learn from one another and just get started.
Thank you. Professor Schmitt.
Yes, thank you also for all the others and your great contributions. The last two messages, what I can conclude is a house, a village, a city or region, they're all complex systems, as we heard and can understand slowly by studying them. And all of these, the house, the village, the city, and the region, they need to work in a circular way as much as possible, because it would be an illusion to have every one of them work completely circular and by themselves. So that goes back to the origin. And with that, I want to say, do not let us forget the not city part of our regions and our continents to the countryside, because food and energy will be coming in a large extent, and water from these places. And people in those areas, they can teach us a lot. Some of these things, when they hear that, what we're talking about today, they will laugh, because they're doing it already, have been doing it for centuries. So let's really work together, also not only with the citizens in the cities, but also with the countryside. And then I think it will be possible to make circular economies for whole regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this inspiring discussion and today during our Mazovian Circular Congress. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you very much to all the participants. I think I got inspired and motivated to work further on the circular economy. I wish you a good day, and of course invite you to the next sessions that are going to be held today during the event.